Bitcoiners, I'm coming at you from a secure location. We're doing some summer travel here to visit some family, all that kind of stuff. P-Man Van with a good morning, all. Fine day to do some Bitcoin. Indeed, I'm at a lower resolution today, so everyone just be prepared for that. Let me know how the audio is coming in and the connection isn't as great here as it is in Vermont or in Montreal. I'm at a senior citizens residence, right? They're not so pumped for high internet speeds as we are. I don't think they've had it upgraded here in about 10 years, but we're doing great. I think we're doing great. Let me know how the stuff is coming in as we go. Let me have a few good mornings here. B for Victory, Beaumatin, good morning, Bitcoiners. Indeed, P-Man Van, Pleb Chris, good morning, indeed. Matt, good morning, hope you're doing great. Whoops. Florida, we love Florida, 13, Randon, we're big fans of Florida. Good morning, Robert, hope you're doing great. Sean, audio good, I'm getting an audio good, okay, audio good, great. The angles are a little different as well. I noticed when I changed the resolution. It's the camera resolution that I've changed here. That's one of the things I've done. Let me just put this down a little. All right. So let me just confirm with y'all that we got a total sunrise here where I am. So we're good. And Bitcoin is just running fine. All that's left for us to do is have a coffee, talk about what's new, huh? Justin with a good morning. And we got a Lubbock, Texas person here. Lubbock. Love Lubbock. Big fan. Everything is fine and Bitcoin is running. We got some folks from Rome here. We got some folks from Belgium. Now, in case any of y'all are wondering, right? We like to start every show with Moscow time. It's the fakest news we can find. How can we possibly find real news these days? It's summer, so it's just interns working at all the major news networks. So it's by nature completely fake right now. But we still have some that have, a nugget of humor in them, which we love, right? So CNN telling everyone today, in older adults, a little excess weight isn't a bad thing. Okay, guys, don't worry. If you're a little bit, don't worry, you don't have to get in better health. No, you're fine. Now, it might be that we've got some violence in American cities, right? Some people said defund the police. So what's left to do? Well, they give you some advice here in Oakland. Oakland police advise residents to reinforce their doors as home invasions increase. Well, that might work. Good for San Francisco. At least they're coming up with solutions, right? I don't know how many more solutions they're going to be able to come up with, though. It might be running out because while they're also saying, get some doors on your windows, that's kind of like a logic thing, right? Protect yourself with doors, bars on your doors if the police aren't coming because there's no more money. But you do still need a bit of math, right? To say, well, no money for the police equals I should buy some metal bars for my doors. Let's hope they can still do that because California, this is new, right? California has approved math curriculum changes that promote social justice over standard skills. So let's just hope they still understand the cost benefit and risk analysis of bars on their windows after all of this, because they might be seeing the upside of no bars on their windows because it could help social justice. You never know, right? People who don't have stuff can get stuff, right? It's great. This one's real fun. As someone who grew up with real sort of hippy dippy parents who loved music, right? My parents, that's why I often have this rebellion against music, because my parents were such 1960s music fans. Now, I had the benefit of my dad in the 90s sort of going through a music detox, saying, well, maybe I shouldn't organize my worldview around pop music and rock and roll. But nevertheless, I still was exposed to tons of good music. So at least they had good taste. I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. But they had another musician they loved, right? They used to play this music around my house a lot when I was a kid. I think they bought the record, and it was Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, right? And it was a big hit. I remember Tracy Chapman. My parents would listen to that when I was a kid all the time, the whole album back to front with their friends, right? That's what people did back before there was internet. They would put an album on and listen to it. Well, it turns out someone has covered Fast Car by Tracy Chapman, and it went number one. Now, if you didn't know, Tracy Chapman, when she put it out, it's one of the most iconic rock and roll songs ever, and it was a big hit. But it turned out that the Washington Post wasn't that happy with the way things have turned out. And because this new, I got to tell you, the race of these people is white, right? So the guy who's covered it is white, and he's he's singing a country music version of it. And the Washington Post says, as Luke Combs' hit cover of Tracy Chapman's Fast Car dominates the country charts, it's bringing up some complicated emotions in fans and singers who know that Chapman, as a queer Black woman, would have had an almost zero chance at the achievement herself. Now, if you read the article, what you realize, it's just trying to slander country music, right? So it's just a slander on country music. Maybe they're right. I don't know. Maybe she wouldn't have been a number one country star. She was the number one when it came out for all the music, but that's fine. This one's pretty good. This is some excellent Moscow time here. High quality Moscow time. So, in Canada, there's a lot of debate right now about the LGBTQ plus curriculum in schools, right? And Justin Trudeau is now blaming American right-wing propaganda for Muslim people being against LGBTQ plus. And he has he got a little slogan here, and it's "Leave our kids alone." So he's doing "Leave our kids alone" to some amorphous group of American right-wing people who apparently have a problem with what's going on. Now, I have two more Moscow time stories, but what they really are is a lead into our theme for the day, which we're going to be talking about, and it comes around with the Turning Point conference. Turning Point USA. Turning Point USA is an organization started by Charlie Kirk, and it's sort of a grassroots conservative thing, very anti-Republican party, but still a sort of aligned with Republicans who are more on the Trump side of things, let's say. So they had a big meeting this weekend, a big conference. Everybody was there. They got all kinds of folks to come in and give their pitches. We're going to get into it in a second. But the first one, right? So Mike Pence went there. Didn't go so well for him. Didn't go so well. There was some fake news produced about Mike Pence after, saying that he didn't care about American cities. That was fake. Don't get all excited that Mike Pence says he cares more about Ukraine. That's a summer fake news job, right? But the Wall Street Journal published an article he wrote today in response to his not so great turn at Turning Point, and it says, "Only weapons can end the Ukraine war. Europe should provide humanitarian aid so that the U.S. can provide tanks, F-16s, and artillery shells." What could go wrong? What could go wrong? But here's the last bit of fake news. This is the last one. And this is again about the meeting this weekend, Turning Point. New York Times, Tucker Carlson turns a Christian presidential forum into a Putin showcase. Right? It's a Putin showcase. It's great. So what happened this weekend? Exactly that. So Tucker Carlson did a really amazing thing, actually. So I guess the Blaze, Turning Point, a few folks hosted this event. And what they did was they had Tucker Carlson go with one candidate after the other and sort of question them on the same things, so that he could sort of have a contrasting list of answers and all that stuff, right? So every candidate was given more or less the same questions, and every candidate's answers can be put next to each other and compared. Some candidates did great, some candidates not so good. So it turns out that DeSantis did poorly, right? Tim Scott probably disqualified himself. Tim Scott, another person running for the Republican nomination, probably destroyed his candidacy, downplayed fentanyl, downplayed what it meant in American cities, and also said that that the war in Ukraine. So he was being asked about the Ukraine conflict by Tucker, and he says, Why not force a peace? Tucker asked him. They're a client state of the United States. Without America's backing, there's kind of no Ukraine. We're literally paying the salaries of the bureaucrats. And he said, well, that's not going to be that way. And we got to go and save democracy and all these kinds of things, right? So the other one that went very poorly, of course, was DeSantis. He kept trying to turn the subject um, from the Ukraine question to immigration, and he was pushed into a corner to answer those questions. Wasn't great at it. The ones who did do well, though, you can imagine, were Vivek Ramaswamy. So lots of people talking about Vivek's performance. One of the most interesting ones that he gave, and it was just such a breath of fresh air when he was talking about the January 6th stuff. He gave probably the greatest answer I've ever heard on the subject, and I'll read it to you, right? So Tucker asking about January 6th, and Vivek says, you want to know what caused January 6th? Pervasive censorship in this country. In the lead up to January 6th, we were told you could not question where the virus came from. We were told that you could not send a private message to someone on the eve of an election that Hunter Biden's laptop story was true. You were told that you had to be locked down. You had to take a vaccine that was mandated while Antifa and BLM roam and burn the streets. That's what caused January 6th, a cycle of censorship. Just imagine saying something like that even a year ago, which is really why I think this Turning Point USA title was great. I think in many ways we're at a turning point. And what is the turning point that we're seeing? Well, you can see it in a few ways, right? Tucker Carlson, with those questions, was able to sort of expose the delineation between, let's say, Republicans who are a little more interested in peace and Republicans who maybe are a little more interested in getting campaign funds from the military industrial complex. And indeed, you could sort of see this ability that we're gaining rapidly gaining the ability to differentiate between talking points and propaganda that's created by this corrupt merger of corporate and state power. So basically, where you can see where talking points are injected into people's speeches and points of view and arguments, and where you can see that those are not really their opinions and they're really just much more of the construct from the military industrial complex, giving them their talking points and telling them what opinions to have in order to get their checks. Now, maybe they believe them, right? You can believe things if you get paid for it, right? That's not hard for the human mind to handle. But this idea that humans are able to now or that people and Americans are able to see this difference in conversation is becoming really, really useful. So David Sachs mentioned it a bit. He says, Ukraine has become a litmus test for Republicans, not just because of its own importance, but also because it demonstrates whether a candidate will go along with or stand up to the MSM's false narratives about the current thing. Pence and Scott showed that they were either too brain dead or too brainwashed to resist. And does it make a difference? Of course not, right? If you're brainwashed or brain dead, it's about the same thing as far as everyone's concerned. Um, and a lot of it reminded me, and so, well, let me give you one breakdown just because I thought it was great of a few other of the things that were said by each of the candidates, and then we'll move it to the Bitcoin conversation. So this is from Philip B. Lee, and he's talking here about all of the Republican candidates. So let's just put them all into their context, and he took sort of a one-line highlight from each of them. So this is what he says. Mike Pence, America's problems are not his concern. Gone. Now, again, it was fake news. The way he said it, they used a clip a lot like what they did to RFK this weekend, right? We're going to talk about that later too. So RFK also got into trouble with one of these out of context clips that make him look like he was being an anti-Semite. So in the case of Mike Pence, it was done to him too, right? He never said he didn't care about American cities. So if you're hearing from Republicans that Mike Pence said he didn't care about American cities, now he has no chance. We're not supporting him, and that article he wrote for the Wall Street Journal disqualifies him, right? Probably a complete idiot, but you didn't need to lie about him to destroy his campaign. Here's another one. Asa Hutchinson. Tucker asks, how many COVID shots did you take? Instead of answering, he deflects and said, how many did you take? Tucker says 0. Asa was flustered. Gone. Nikki Haley. Tucker says 81 million votes for Joe Biden, 15 million more than Barack Obama. After prevaricating for 5 minutes, Nikki Haley says Joe Biden won the election. gone. Ron DeSantis. I saw a video that showed DeSantis spinning his microphone continuously like someone on drugs. Not impressive. Gone. Vivek Ramaswamy did not call out Nancy Pelosi for her role in January 6th. Not gone. Down a notch in my mind. That's not what I saw from Vivek. I thought Tucker Carlson did a masterful job. He was not mean, but he made sure the candidates answered his questions. Donald Trump is looking better all the time. So that's what this one person said about it all. So the thing where I start to see Bitcoin in this. So the idea here that we can now, with the Ukraine question, have this litmus test, right, that separates propagandist talking points from more individualized talking points, and this contrast, which was really helpful when this thing went on over the weekend at Turning Point USA. And contrast indeed remains one of the most persuasive techniques you can find in order to draw out a point of view or crystallize a change of mind, right? Contrast has persuasion sort of built into it, much more than just arguing the merits of one thing. Arguing the merits of one thing is very easy for someone to turn out, but putting two things next to each other and showing the contrast helps a person decide for themselves what they're seeing, and therefore create new conclusions. So when you see these two things next to each other, you're able to gauge, let's say, a difference, right? So here's just one, for example, right? We had all this political stuff happen this weekend. We had all kinds of people. Now just look at what a headline, for example, from the LA Times this weekend that was written. So a headline from LA Times this weekend, and now use this filter of contrast, right, of what we saw. So here it is. LA Times says, opinion: Elon Musk accidentally ruined Twitter. He did all of us a huge favor. And then if you read this LA Times article written this weekend, it's all about Meta and how well Meta is doing. And people actually wanted Threads, and they wanted a cool place that wasn't political, right? Meanwhile, this weekend, the numbers for Threads have absolutely cratered. Kaneko the Great gives us the numbers here. He says engagement on Instagram's Threads has cratered. Time spent on the app dropped over 50% in 1 week, while active daily users have already dropped by 25%. Users who want to delete Threads will need to nuke their entire Instagram account. So it's not that simple, but some people are willing to do it. You even had the counter signal of what's his name? What's that crazy guy? Jim Cramer, right? So just the other day, again saying Zuck can do better, whatever Twitter can do. But it turns out that with all of these degradations of the system, no one used it, and Twitter this weekend was more popular than ever, right? So it's not just a seasonal thing. You've got Twitter making all kinds of news, getting in all kinds of debates, being right in the middle of the action, everyone reporting directly on this leadership campaign, everyone talking specifically about Biden, for example, on his European trip. It was just Twitter that was the main venue of activity and debate over the weekend. And whatever the Los Angeles Times is writing here, it looks ridiculous. And again, contrast is what helps you see that, right? Seeing them next to each other, you see that the system that wasn't designed to make money, we've been talking about that for a while. Threads, there's no way Threads was ever designed to make money, right? It was designed to basically have what some of his donors, some of the Democrat donors, some of the Democrat people that Zuckerberg donates to, had a wish list, that they had a place that was like what Elon Musk has created for Twitter and for people to have this debate. And they wanted another version where they could censor people again. Now, I don't have proof of that, right? But that's what it looks like, only because you don't get into a Twitter clone to make money. Twitter itself can't make money. So it's not a money-making exercise. It's a propaganda exercise, and it didn't work, right? So seeing these two things contrast really helps you make these conclusions and come up with a updated point of view if you didn't already have one, right? So again, someone just sitting here arguing, look at Twitter, it's great, right? You should use Twitter. And then someone arguing, oh, look at Threads. But putting them next to each other, you start to get a better sense of what's going on. And it gives you sort of a higher resolution idea of how propaganda works and exactly how insidious it works, and how it's orchestrated, how it's lined up, how it's set up, how it's pre-suaded. All those things that you need a bit of technique and observation to notice when you put something contrasting together. you just sort of give everyone that microscope um, recalibration and refocus. So you're almost letting everyone see more perceptibly down. And Bitcoin has a very similar role. So here's Brian Rommel, who we talk about all the time, talking about what AI does along these lines. And then I'm going to talk about it with Bitcoin, because we had this George Gammon story this week. And, George Gammon, who might be a speaker at one of our Bitcoin events coming up shortly. But George Gammon had some stuff to say about Bitcoin and the Larry Fink thing, right? So we're going to talk about that. But we're going to talk about this first, because it gives us the context to understand what I saw when I saw George Gammon debating about Bitcoin and everything that's happened this weekend. So here's Brian Rommel talking about AI and what it can actually do for human perception, right? So he says, every time humans invent a new technology, we have a newer, higher resolution of what we think is reality. And large language models and AI is a form of a new microscope, not only into data and information, but into humanity. And indeed, when you get these new technologies and it allows you to see clearer, one of the things that Bitcoin has helped us see clearer is propaganda when it comes to reality of money, right? A lot of people never even question the reality of the US dollar, the issuer, how the Federal Reserve works with the government, how the treasuries are issued and who buys them at the Federal Reserve, and how this whole mechanism works by collateralizing human work, collateralizing your tax contributions to the government in order to fund greater and greater debts for the country, in order to fund more and more of the stuff we're talking about in Ukraine all the time. So this relationship of government having the monopoly over issuance of money and the benefits it brings to the government when it comes to deciding on what they can do with war and what they can do with this and what they can do with that. That whole question is now much easier for Bitcoiners to see and much more easy for Bitcoiners to understand, because Bitcoin was one of those inventions, like I said, that is a microscope that you're able to put onto a situation and get a more vivid idea of what reality actually is. So all that said, this weekend, you had Larry Fink come out and say the following, right? That Bitcoin will transcend every international currency due to its broad-based world demand. And he also slammed continuously US debt burdens and how much debt America has. And something he never would have said even 3 or 4 months ago. He might have thought it, but he wouldn't have said it, right? So here's what George Gammon says. If Larry Fink, world's top ESG grifter and WEF disciple, said something positive about an asset I owned, I would never use it as validation. I'll be interested to see what the Bitcoin community does if Klaus Schwab says something positive about Bitcoin. So Michael Saylor said Larry Fink of BlackRock thinks Bitcoin will transcend every international currency. So George Gammon here trying to criticize Michael Saylor about what he said, right? So the thing about it, and he goes, it's all about freedom, liberty, and non-government money that's not controlled by the state. And if you don't believe me, just ask Larry Fink, Klaus Schwab, and Bill Gates. That's the old Groucho Marx line. Here's a great joke if you ever want to have a fun time about principles and all that. It's one I use regularly. It's Groucho Marx, where he went, I have my principles, and if you don't like them, I have some more. Which is great, right? So George Gammon having some fun here, talking about it. Luke Mikic, Bitcoiner, says Bitcoin is for enemies. The game theory suggests every Bitcoin enemy has no choice but to buy it. Eventually, even Klaus. And so George Gammon answers, so if Klaus says something positive about Bitcoin, you're going to wear that with a badge of honor. You're going to wave that around and say, see, I told you so. Bitcoin is doing everything it said it would because the leader of the Malthusian cult agrees with me. Now, George Gammon is, I'd say, missing a little piece here, which is that indeed, and then he goes on to say, what if he says something good about crypto? What are the Bitcoin people going to say then, right? But here's the thing. Bitcoiners are getting a more and more of an ability to see these things through contrast. They're getting the lens and the microscope. And one of the abilities Bitcoiners have had for a while is to see propaganda as it's being disseminated. If someone is disseminating propaganda that's good for them, we can still see it, right? Now, if someone is disseminating propaganda that isn't good, for Bitcoin, or that falls out of a well developed Bitcoin worldview and a well shared Bitcoin worldview. Remember, Bitcoin passes in a P2P nature. Bitcoin passes like art, right? It's word of mouth. So when you pass Bitcoin ideas around to each other, they're mimetic, they're coming from individuals, they're not coming from huge constructs. So it's very difficult. And as our perceptions and our microscope gets more and more fine tuned, it's very difficult to even pass a tiny bit of propaganda through the Bitcoin filter. Bitcoiners will see it and are absolutely so toxic to anything that would be like what George Gammon is mentioning here. So Bitcoiners have probably the most accurate filter and microscope these days on the corrupt nature of information creation through propaganda machines, probably the most accurate idea of the corrupt merger of state and corporate power, especially when it comes to creating talking points, because we've been living in this for a long time. We've been living in anti-Bitcoin propaganda for 10 years at least, right? We've been bathing in it. And because of that, our ability to use contrast to perceive these differences is much, much greater than anyone else's. And George Gammon here basically underlines that. George Gammon is saying here that his filter on the world is from that old place, right? Where, oh, a rich person said something. Oh, this person said a talking point. I'm going to use it now. Well, Bitcoiners don't really care if a person changes their mind later. They'll figure it out, right? They're not going to give Larry Fink some kind of bonus points because he said one good thing about Bitcoin. He's on trial for life now from Bitcoiners. And whether or not they agree with him for this weekend because he said something good doesn't mean Bitcoiners have shackled themselves to some ego situation and some cognitive dissonance situation where they're now in bed with Larry Fink, and because he said one good thing about Bitcoin, he's in the gang, and everything he says means that we got to agree with him, and now we're on the same team. It's not that, right? That is not the reality that Bitcoiners have about the world, and it's not the reality Bitcoiners propagate individually between each other. Sure, he said one good thing. If he said a single bad thing tomorrow, it would be over. And it would be the same for any of our, if Michael Saylor said a crazy thing tomorrow, Michael Saylor, right, forget about Larry Fink for a second. If Michael Saylor came out tomorrow and said, actually, Ethereum is kind of awesome because proof of stake, oh, wait a minute, it's great. You can actually coordinate to have sophisticated Wall Street transactions. We all want that, right? If he came out with an argument that even made sense logically, Bitcoiners would not have it. They would burn him in effigy and it would be over, right? And it doesn't even have to be Ethereum. Even if he found some scammy way to use Bitcoin and it was all about getting people to give him some money for some elaborate scheme that he's going to turn around and make Bitcoiners rich and make hyper Bitcoinization, but it's all clearly to serve some corporate purpose, Bitcoiners would have a lot to say about it. And he certainly wouldn't get a free ride. He already doesn't get a free ride, right? There's a lot of people out there who don't like Michael Saylor that are Bitcoiners. So, but not enough for it to be really a point for what I'm making. But this idea that Bitcoiners and now other people are getting to this turning point where they can actually see how propaganda operates. That's sort of what George Gammon is not seeing here, right? George Gammon is still going on, well, my rule is if a rich person I don't like says something, I can't use it to validate my point of view, right? My point of view is against him in other ways. So I can't possibly take any compliment he gives to Bitcoin and take that to the bank and use it as a reason to validate my worldview. So Bitcoiners, I don't think, fall into this situation as desperately as some other people do. And because of that, we're sort of a little immunized, right? We're a little immunized. So that perception and that microscope and that ability to perceive the propaganda being infiltrated through this information laundering system, Bitcoiners have a gauge on where that happens. They don't have to filter where George Gammon is filtering. George Gammon is filtering at the level of WEF bad, right? Or maybe not, right? He's just trying to point out the hypocrisy of Bitcoiners who are at once hating on WEF people and then 2 minutes later saying, "Oh, this WEF person is said something good about Bitcoin, so I'm going to take them. I'm going to embrace them." But again, it's too far up the river for Bitcoiners, right? We don't have to make those choices that early in the process, or that early, or when those points are being made. Bitcoiners have the capacity to perceive the exact moment where corporate and public corruption has infiltrated the thoughts and created a frame in which to understand a thing that is highly propagandized and is not serving an individual's interests. Because Bitcoin does promote a sort of worldview based on an individual and is very individual centric. Any other system that's promoting like a government to be at the center of it, or some benefit to the security or safety of the military or success of the military, we have for a long time been able to perceive those as exactly that: propaganda entering the system, camouflaged as something else, but more or less intended to do exactly what Brian Rommel is talking about here: getting a better sense of reality and humanity. We've understood for a long time that humans can be prompt engineered as easily as these AI can be. And if you give them the right prompts, they will come up with the right output, and or the output that you wish to get, unless they have the capacity to filter out these or to notice this manipulation. So Bitcoiners have that power. And it's exactly that corporate merger that we're starting to be able to see very clearly. And if you take this, for example, this conversation around David Sachs questioning Google and YouTube's influence over democracy, for example, and this whole idea of doing that which you can't do, the government can't do, through private interests, is what we're getting at here. So here's him asking the question: what gives them the power to interfere in our democracy? That they were that way where they just decide for their own reasons that the public can't watch a video of Jordan Peterson interviewing RFK. After they banned the interview, I said that we should shatter Google into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. And that went massively viral. There is a big part of this country that is really pissed at Google and the way they are exercising arbitrary power. And the good news is about this, we're going to get, I think, a little more vantage point into BlackRock and Google and all these folks, because it turns out that the one of the investigations that the House Republicans are now going to launch is on BlackRock and Vanguard, and more or less the weaponization argument you heard about with the FBI and the FISA warrants. They're going to put it into the private sector to look exactly where these propagandist points are coming out. So this is what Vivek was explaining this weekend in Turning Point. Another just home run by Vivek, by the way. He had a tremendous weekend, if anyone didn't see. Vivek explains how the White House uses private actors like BlackRock to implement what they can't get passed through Congress, label it ESG, and claim it's good for the environment. So House Republicans are going to launch this investigation, and it'll look exactly like what we've seen with the story around the FISA warrants and the weaponization of the government. So Google and Facebook and all these folks would do the censorship that the government is not allowed to do because of constitutional protections. So you have this ability now to perceive these things very early, and they stick out very clearly, and it's going to become more and more. So BlackRock, right? I don't think Bitcoiners are going to be like, "Oh, I love BlackRock every day now. Larry Fink, he for president," right? This is never going to happen. Bitcoiners reject the frame altogether. Here's the best way to think about it. And here's David Sachs on Trump, and how Bitcoiners now reject these binary frames that are used for propagandistic purposes, right? So this is David Sachs saying about, remember the CNN interview where Trump went on, right? Who do you want to win this war? The CNN reporter asked him, Ukraine or Russia? And Trump just said, I want people to stop dying. And he rejected the premise of the question, right? So Trump showed here that he just wouldn't accept the framing of the question. Who do you want to win, right? No more dying. And the ability for Bitcoiners to take this third route, just as Trump did, just as Vivek is talking about, has become more and more clear. The third railroad for Bitcoiners is more and more clear because you can tell where propaganda is entering the system. The minute you see the propaganda, you say, well, that's probably, I don't want to go down that road, right? And now you can see it, and I thought this was one of the more interesting things that happened over the weekend, simply because it didn't become an issue. But here's what it was, and you could have seen a bunch of fake news about this, which is this famous now interview that. So first of all, this was the dinner party that RFK went to in New York, where someone farted in order to make like their their point. Like apparently, it was just totally crass and out of control. But the New York Post was there, and John Levine um, took a quote from RFK completely out of context and tried to write some anti-Semitic smear job where RFK had said, what we've seen from the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus is that it seems to be targeted to different races around the world, or at least has a higher preponderance, a higher effect on certain races in the world, right? And his excuse of it, his explanation is he was using it as a way to frame that this is now being done, that there is a marketplace for race specific viruses that can be used in warfare, right? So he was using it more as a concept, but of course the fake news had to come out and just make up a story that, oh, he says that basically it left the suggestion that Jewish people created it and protected themselves and and were giving it to other people, right? That's what the mainstream media was trying to say he said. So Michael Schellenberger comes out and says, people say Robert Kennedy fueled an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, but he didn't. China has indeed been researching ethnically targeted bioweapons. What's more, Kennedy triggered a long overdue debate about how to rein in the dual use research that has spiraled out of control. Not only that, Americans have been talking about this for a long time, about creating, or people have been criticizing the Americans for creating such viruses for a while. Now, I don't know the truth. I don't, but I can tell when propaganda is entering the equation. Now, did the Chinese use propaganda to say that Americans were doing it? Absolutely. Just like the Americans are now using propaganda to say the Chinese are doing it. But if you go back to 2022, Chinese Minister of Defense spokesperson says that the U.S. lacks transparency, demanded the U.S. explain their suspect biological activity in Ukraine and abroad. So they've been saying this for a long time, right? It's not new that it's been happening. And so because of that, this reframing, this ability to tell the difference between propaganda and reality is starting to catch on, and it can catch on in really, really big ways. One of them is crime, right? We've been hearing all this crime stuff in America. It's always been, well, how do we fix it? It's so complicated. And then, of course, Bukele comes up with his thing. If you tattoo your face with gang numbers, you're going to jail, right? And so, of course, you can see the propaganda. We talk about it all the time on Moscow Time. Oh, look, Bukele said that the country has no murders, but actually they suppressed human rights. So what, it's not a good story. Other countries might do it too, and then they might also suppress human rights. What are we going to do? So here's Nayib Bukele this weekend saying almost every government in the world is 10x to 1000x stronger than all of its criminals combined. The reason they don't end crime is because they are colluded with it or because they benefit from it. You pick the reason. Some might argue that even though governments are more powerful, they are in fact weaker because they must respect human rights. Yeah, sure. Tell that to the dozens of families killed in every building in Iraq because there was the possibility of one terrorists being inside. And indeed, it is exactly what Bukele is saying here, right? When Bukele says that the reason why they don't end crime and the reason why you have this fatalistic approach is either two things. It's either they're colluding or they're stupid. It might be both. We actually can't tell the difference. It's almost impossible in this stage of the death spiral the US dollar is in and the nation state system organized around the monopolistic issuance of money and the entire system of leveraging salaried workers and their future tax output or input in order to further indebt a country. This model is so broken and now so full of low IQ individuals running it and very, very stupid people, that you actually can't tell the difference. Exactly as Bukele is saying, we don't know if it's crime or stupidity, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's all the same at this point. It is a system dying. And because Bitcoiners can perceive either the really stupid points or the super corrupt points, our ability to perceive the corrupt nature of the corrupt merger of corporate private interests and the development of talking points through that merger is exactly what um, has happened. Our ability to perceive those differences, our ability to navigate those differences, our ability to see the contrast is so much higher than it's ever been, that I think we're at a turning point. And exactly as Brian Rommel, the filter that you get in order to look more closely at these things, the technology brings you a microscope, and each step up in technology allows you to have a higher resolution picture of more microscopic elements of your society, to have greater resolution, to understand what reality is. Right, when you go to this new scale and you start to see what reality is, the ability to sift through these things becomes very clear. And having nation states as powerful as they are is becoming absolutely antithetical to most human ideas of how the future should work and where we should head with this stuff and what we should build and what we shouldn't build. And Turning Point USA this weekend, I think, showed that more and more people are starting to see within one particular political party that this ability to differentiate who's still using talking points developed by um, corporate interests and who's able to say what they actually believe is becoming actually easy. It was easy this weekend to see the difference, and there was unanimity around it. Now, let's talk about RFK one more time. So, again, what you saw at Turning Point this weekend, I think, was the result of Trump's time spent in the Republican Party. It's been 2015, so we're at 8 years now that he has had an effect in this party. It's 8 years of Trump in the Republican Party. And remember what I've said many times about why people like me will always love Donald Trump forever and for always. I don't want him to be the president again. I wouldn't say no, right? But um, what he did, the thing we'll always appreciate him for is how much he affected and changed the Republican Party. And they'll never be the same, right? This Turning Point this weekend was the most grassroots, connected to the people event where you actually saw huge Republican candidates getting booed constantly if they had the minute propaganda came off their tongue, they were booed, right? Now, the Democrats still don't have this ability. They still haven't been given the microscope, but that's what RFK can do, right? You're not going to get Trump to do. Trump is never going to have this effect on Democrats. They hate him. They'll always hate him. It'll never stop, right? The Democrats are not going to, most Democrats are not going to become Trump supporters. Trump might be able to win with just independents and people opening their eyes, but actual Republicans, actual Democrats, he'll never persuade them. But that's why RFK is such a valuable candidate. The same things that Trump did to the Republicans, RFK can do to the Democrats. He can change them forever. He can give them that microscope. And because he is pushing Bitcoin into their point of view, Bitcoin itself might become their lens to understand the contrast between who's pushing government propaganda points and who isn't. And that would be an incredible turn of events. And I think that's where things are headed. That's what it looks like. It looks like the ability for the media to push a candidate like Gavin Newsom isn't going to work, right? Gavin Newsom tried to do a reading or a TikTok or something this weekend about a book that was banned. And it turns out the book was written by a guy named Harvey, or the book mentioned Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was like a pedophile and all these terrible things. And so here he is out there pushing some form of propaganda because it might help him. And he just simply comes off as a propaganda machine. Now, if you're in a world where people's perceptions are becoming more and more attuned to what is propaganda, how propaganda is being um, um, uploaded into people's brains or downloaded into people's brains, and who's doing the uploads, who is doing the water carrying for the propagandists, who in government is giving this corporate talking point of view, um, the capacity of Gavin Newsom to not be that guy is zero, right? He is that guy. And so he seems like the perfect, in the way that Trudeau is the perfect candidate to articulate how we've moved into clown world, and we have some of the least noble people in the world running our countries. Gavin Newsom has all the same potential as Trudeau. Like he is as irritating to a lot of people. So the good news is we are completely at a turning point where Bitcoin, like AI, can be used as a microscope in order to get a higher resolution on reality and to really understand exactly at what point the merger between corporate interests and private public power happened. And shouldn't be much longer before we actually break that merger and fully separate money and state in the way Bitcoiners have been telling you for years, whether Larry Fink says it's coming or not, right? George Gammon doesn't understand the incredible attuned nature that Bitcoiners have, and we can actually sift through every one of his words and not have general heuristics. That's what it comes down to. Gammon is using a heuristic being just a system that sort of shows that he is not a Bitcoiner and hasn't been running in sophisticated crowds for that long. He's been running in crowds that use these old heuristics. Well, he said it, he's not great, right? I can't follow him. He might say something else, and then what am I going to do? What if he says something I disagree with? Do I have to agree with him, right? Our system is not simply like, wow, that guy's great, now I'm going to take over his whole point of view. Most Bitcoiners' worldview is from Bitcoin itself, not from the things that Bitcoin people say, right? So there you go. All right. Enmity, looking forward to the show. Thanks. California lawmakers argue that there is no correct answer in math. All answers can be open to interpretation. What a clown show. We love it. We love it. I'm sure Chapman is happy with the royalties, even though they are country white. Yeah, I mean, she's doing great. I love Tracy Chapman. Like, her album was awesome. I've never had a bad thing to say about her, right? She's just great. First time catching the show live. Great, Ben. Glad you made it, man. Pence said, I didn't care. I saw what he said. Yeah, but it was, of course you saw it. But anytime you hear yourself saying that, I saw what he said, you've probably been confused or tricked, right? Watch the whole video. There's no way Mike Pence doesn't care about American villages, right? Now, I get it, but this, he might, I just doubt it. He thinks it, right? How is it fake? It's true. It's true. Don't believe the Zionist talker. Pence. Yeah, I'm not a Pence fan. The Zionist talker. Not a Pence fan, right? Just telling you, don't fall. Just because it feels good to criticize him, and because other people are criticizing, it doesn't mean it's true, right? That's all I'm saying. It's good to practice finding this stuff wherever it is, especially when it's on something that you want to believe, right? It's especially helpful to find it when you want to believe it. Now, there's a plenty to criticize about Mike Pence. I don't want Mike Pence to be the president. He's done, right? We're making fun of his corporate talking points, but there's no way he doesn't care about American towns, is what I'm saying. It's just, you don't waste your time with it, you know? You got a fast pickup truck, right? RFK almost named him today. He's getting there. He's getting there. Why does nobody talk about Fidelity mining Bitcoin, BlackRock's partner and largest 401k portfolio? Yeah, so Crypto Shinobi. I booked. Here's a fun story. I booked Abby Johnson in 2017 to speak at CoinDesk, and that's where I learned about their Bitcoin mining. She divulged that on stage, called them the Bitcoin Vikings. Nick Carter was part of that staff, by the way, in case people didn't know, as well as David. He was the CEO of the Kraken Bank. I worked with him for a little while. He also worked for Abby. So no, these are real people. Now, this was still just a like skunkworks thing, right? I don't think they were um, doing too much Bitcoin stuff with BlackRock. But I was advising BlackRock, BlackRock asked me to come in 2017 just to be like, what's Bitcoin, right? But they had sophisticated questions, which I mentioned here before. So when I say what's Bitcoin, they were not. It never surprised me in the past few weeks how 2 feet first they've gone in. They were much more sophisticated in 2017 that they were letting on publicly, just like Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan. When I worked in CoinDesk, I was in that part of New York City where the JP Morgan building was like 2 blocks away and the BlackRock building was a couple blocks away. So I walked over there a few times and chat with them. I was looking for speakers for my events, right? So that's why you end up going that way. So there you go. Alaska. Whoa. Yeah, we love Alaska. Hi, Bitcoin Graffiti. Ohio and Alaska. Kenya. We love Kenya too. Good day, prosperous and economic peacemakers via Bitcoin Tribe. What a great good morning, Veterans Cannabis Advocacy Group. I love it. Threads is putting your mind in a box, and Twitter is an arena of ideas. And now you can get paid for ideas. I think the choice is obvious. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I like that. A bowl of soda. Love it. I've heard that too. If you link your Thread account to your Instagram, and if you want to delete the Thread app later. Yeah, no, that's my understanding. You don't make it out. Yeah. Hit the like, guys. Eddie. Fink was positive about Bitcoin, crypto, not Bitcoin. Yeah, well, he said some stuff about Bitcoin. Gammon does not like Bitcoin, and he never has. I say this to him: if you don't believe me or don't get it, I don't have time to try to. Yeah, exactly. Well, look, he has Lynn Alden on a lot. He's in more or less good faith. I just think his system is flawed, right? Like, so what if someone rich says something and they might say something later? So what about Michael Saylor when he said Bitcoin should have property tax? Barely any pushback. Yeah. So what about Bitcoin when he said Bitcoin should have property tax? I don't know if he said it should have property tax. But if it gets it out of being because I guess he's being, his whole issue is they're trying to determine when, because in America, when it comes to security laws, you have a lot of discretion to say when you acquired an asset, especially if it's fungible. So if, fungible being, most Bitcoiners know what fungible means, right? So in Bitcoin, in American securities law, you're able to say the Bitcoin I sold today is actually the one that I bought at the top of the market in 2021, right? So even if it isn't, America gives you a lot of discretion to say, now you can't sell that one twice. If you only bought one, Bitcoin at the top of the market and sold it, you don't get to say I bought two at the top of the market. So as I understand, they were trying to create a situation where Michael Saylor lost a bit of that discretion and couldn't say when he acquired and when he didn't acquire. So I'm not sure, but maybe this property tax thing was related to that. But I don't know what you're talking about exactly. But there, maybe you're making a good point. We should have probably criticized him. Oops. As ridiculous as it is and unlikely to happen, he still said we should all pay our fair share of taxes in applying a property tax on Bitcoin. Yeah, well, sometimes these guys have to say things, right? They get pressure and all that. Larry Fink's public comments are a beacon used to signal to a group of influencers to take a particular action. Yeah, which is an interesting part of propaganda, the steering of the ship. Yeah. Like what I mean is I embrace what Larry Fink said this weekend, right? I'm not like overly excited about it, but it fits my worldview, and we always love when things fit your worldview. So, but that's why I warn against things like Mike Pence and all of that, right? My system remains not to listen to Larry Fink in general, right? I still listen to my composite of P2P Bitcoiners and the Bitcoin tribe. But they can get stuff wrong too, I suppose. As ridiculous as it is. Oh, yeah, sorry. Got permanently banned, suspended from Twitter. Can view, but no bookmarks, no retweets, no DMs, and no tweets or comments. Really, Matchy? What a bummer. Appealed it 10 times. And seems to be a way to shut people up without a perma ban. Wow. I got permaban from the last owners of Twitter. I appealed a bunch, but no luck. But I cannot complain forever. Started a new account and got back in the conversation. Good. Yeah. There you go. I think you're right. Bitcoin or ETH is the go-to stock, which is secure. As much as possible, start using barter and Bitcoin. Stop using fiat. Yeah, we try. We try. ETF's coming. What do I think of Vivek? We love Vivek. Here's, let me read you one of the best Vivek quotes from the weekend. I did save a couple of them because I thought he did such a good job this weekend. So here's one of his tweets that came out after his talk. Excellent. And he goes, God is real. There are two genders. Human flourishing requires fossil fuels. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is no border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism lifts people up from property. There are 3 branches of the U.S. government, not 4. The U.S. Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedoms in history. Now, I could debate a few of those with him, but I'm pretty aligned with what he had to say. So, look, if Vivek becomes the president, I'll be happy. And if you saw all those polls this weekend, like this is kind of what I mean between Trump, Vivek. Now, I just personally think RFK is the right person because it's the Democrats who need to, they need a lot of help. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. But we have a ton of great candidates, don't we? Right? This is sort of the best time to follow American politics ever, ever. How many people did you have that you actually were okay with? It used to be, I wouldn't vote for anyone. None of these people are good. Now you got a bunch. You got a few, Even DeSantis, like he's not, he's so boring, very stupid about many things. But I mean, if somehow he was the president tomorrow, I could probably get happy about it, right? He hates CBDCs. We like that. I have the Dr. Wright Craig hat on. Your brain might be broken, Dr. Cybot. You might have a broken brain. I'm sorry to tell you. The word dichotomy keeps coming to mind. Yeah. What about Bitcoin being a microscope for introspection? Absolutely. Yeah. Bitcoin has, I think, an even stronger effect on the individual, right? So, I've often interpreted like the biblical story of the resurrection of Christ as also being an introspection story, right? It's sort of your lot in life to reinvent yourself constantly and to be reborn, and that's what a lot of dealing with your Jungian shadow, right, growing essentially is about, right? Dying, killing an old version of yourself and being reborn again with whatever upgrade you felt in your spirit needed to be fused and integrated into your energy and your being, into who you are. And Bitcoin, of course, is, to me, remains probably one of the best internal microscopes there is. Simply because it's clean and simple, and when you're making more Bitcoin, things are going good, right? And when you're able to, more or less, I guess a little bit like even with this stuff with Larry Fink, right? Like Bitcoiners have a bit of ego protection here, where they're not going to be influenced by the cognitive dissonance of having said one good thing about someone like Larry Fink. Like I could say 10 terrible things about him today if he said something that bothered me. Like I'm not bound by the future of Larry Fink, right? Great, he said something good about Mexico. Mexico. I'm reading the next thing. He said something good about Bitcoin. Love it, right? But that's the end. Audie Allen, did I already cover the BlackRock ETF? I don't know if I really covered the ETF in so much as I'm real happy that they're doing it, and it looks like it's going to get approved. And it sort of fits, like everything Fink was saying this weekend fits the worldview that most Bitcoiners have been talking about, that I've been talking about, that it really is about energy companies and Wall Street not wanting to hold monopoly money anymore. And remember, hyper Bitcoinization doesn't happen because everyone in the world has Bitcoin. It happens because everyone in the world measures the economy with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a measuring stick, and we need the energy companies and what is a quickly changing Wall Street to embrace the actual psychological measuring tool that Bitcoin is, both for themselves and for the market. And so this is along those lines, right? So it has to happen. Fink getting involved is a major indication that we've entered the era of then we win, as in the Gandhi quote. I believe that. Yeah. This is a great line from Bitcoin Graffiti. I like this initiation frame, a rite of passage. Yeah, Bitcoin is some sort of initiation, a rite of passage to the 21st century. I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Johnny Rico, I'm a big Vivek fan. So am I. Vivek, I mean, it's just even the brain power that these guys have that I love, right? It's just the horsepower that we're dealing with. Like RFK, he's as persuasive as Trump. You know how hard that is to come across in the world, and so is Vivek. These are A+ persuaders, A+ intellectuals. So it's positive. We've never had this many good candidates, right? And so we're yeah, good idea. I've always been a big hero's journey cycle for the board next time. Yeah, I'm visiting family right now, but I'll be back at the board either tomorrow or the day after. So Bitcoin Graffiti, you got a board coming this week. All right, we're gonna get back into the board. We need more boards. Yeah, the AI stuff has taken away a bit of my composing time for the board, so that's why it's been a little weak lately. But the thumbnails have been good. Right? We've been having some good thumbnails. I hope you like the Mickey Mouse today, because that's a turning point, right? Mickey Mouse, the arms dealer. Yeah, yeah. I know the board is the best. Bitcoin Graffiti. I was actually thinking that I owed you some boards. We're gonna get them back, man. We're gonna get them back. All right, team. That's all I got for today. Hope you have a great day. I'm gonna see you tomorrow. And let me get that's good. All right, team. Peace. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.